was dead silence first. There was nothing. And then you had the screams coming. I closed my eyes, and like if I could see these horses coming towards me.
On the 10th of June 1838, 12 white stockmen rode into Mile Creek Station.
It was a mix of young children, women, men, just going about their lives.
They led them away, tied together.
Stabbed by bayonets.
They tore the limbs from babes.
That's all they had, bits and pieces of skulls.
They left them to rot.
I am Sue Blacklock. I am a descendant of the survivors.
My name is Miles Gerard. I am a descendant.
One of the 12 white men was John Blake.
And I am the great-great-grandson of John Blake.
In 1838, 28 Wirraway people were massacred at Mile Creek Station in central New South Wales. Whilst this was part of a much larger killing spree in the area, and just one of many, many massacres across Australia, this moment stands out in our history. It was the first and only time that white perpetrators were brought to justice. Now, the descendants of both sides of this story are trying to make things right.
Each year, hundreds, sometimes thousands of people meet at Mile Creek, but this year's pretty special. It's 180 years since the massacre and 20 years since the descendants met for the first time, right here.
For 48-year-old nurse Susan Blake, this weekend is her first time visiting the place her ancestor committed a massacre. It's also the first time she will meet the descendants of those he killed.
Going to tell the story to someone, it's very uncomfortable at first because they've never really met a direct descendant of a mass murderer.
How are you, darling?
Good.
Retired bank manager Des has been coming to Mile Creek every year for 20 years.
How are you feeling about going tomorrow?
A little bit nervous.
Anybody who lived in Australia on the land in those days who thinks their ancestors weren't involved in massacres, they are kidding themselves.
For Des and Susan, learning about their ancestor is a personal passion, but it's what came after the massacre that changed history.
The trial was very, very controversial.
Being the first trial where white people were put on trial for murdering Indigenous people.
One of the jurors in the trial made his views on Aboriginal people very clear.
I look on the blacks as a set of monkeys, and the earlier they're exterminated from the face of the earth, the better. I would never consent to hang a white man for a black one.
The white people got off from the all-white jury in 15 minutes. The history starts when they were retried.
Of the 12 suspected perpetrators, 7 faced a retrial and were hanged. The rest escaped conviction, including John Blake.
Years later, John Blake committed suicide and he slit his throat.
We would like to believe that he did have a guilty conscience.
I hope that he actually grew a heart.
This family history is part of the reason that Susan has dedicated her life to Aboriginal health, living and working in remote communities for more than 20 years.
People were murdered, people were brutally murdered. You start to learn about the real Australian history, not the fairy tale Australian history that we all learn at school.
Why is it important that we commemorate Mile Creek? Lacey, if you can tell me that one.
We celebrate World War I Remembrance Day and even World War II, and so why is it different if we don't do it for the Aboriginals' history?
Inverell High School has one of the highest enrolments in Aboriginal studies in the state.
It's because it's real. It's because they drive past it on the way to if they're going to Tamworth. It's something that happened in their backyard. They go to school with families that are still descendants of what happened. Not often are you sitting in Year 8 history or Year 10 ab studies and wow, that happened to my great-great-grandmother.
My name is Miles Gerard. I'm 16. Originally from Tinga, so that's Kamilaroi mob. The students actually come up and say, you know, this is so sad and upsetting.
Like many kids in this area, Miles grew up knowing the story of the massacre, but it was only a few years ago that his Auntie Sue told him this story was about his own family.
It's a story that we heard. The Aboriginal was shot because they were thieves, no hopers, and that's why they was killed. When we asked the question why the kids, they was just as bad as their parents. That's what we heard in the schools. It put that fear into us of men on horses was going to come and do the same to us, drag us out the house and shoot us and kill us.
As an Indigenous person, you sort of like feel this sense of grief. Yeah, it impacts not just one Indigenous person, pretty much all Indigenous people.
When I get old and I'm in a wheelchair and I can't walk no more, what I want you younger generation to do, to follow in my footsteps.
I think that knowing and educating will bring us closer together as one peoples.
And it's 180 years since we lost our the ancestors, but we just thank you for all being here, standing side by side with one another.
Des and Sue met here 20 years ago.
He said sorry. I said, for what? You didn't do nothing. It was your ancestors that done this. There's no blame. We can forgive, but we cannot forget.
Sue was a lovely, cuddly lady. I would call Sue a friend. She's a wonderful woman.
Today, history will repeat itself, with the next generation of descendants of both the survivors and the perpetrators coming together.
I think all the stories that I've read will come flooding back, just looking at the landscape or the trees, knowing that 180 years ago, the Indigenous people were running through there, scared. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, this is Susan, this is Sue, and this is Miles.
Hi,
We've been doing this for
a long time. Yes.
So nice to meet you. I think there's always going to be that thought in the back of your mind that there is blame still there.
How do you feel about finally meeting me, one of the descendants?
With all truth, I'm very honoured to meet you. And I think it's great that you're actually here and you're acknowledging what your ancestors did.
I didn't know what your answer was actually going to be. And I'm thankful that you don't hate me.
You shouldn't feel guilty. You're a loving person who loves Indigenous people, and that's who you should be representing today. And I love how you're coming here and you're acknowledging us, acknowledging yourself and your ancestors.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Why do you keep coming back every year?
It's one of the best things probably that I've done in my life, I believe.
To know the truth, to put the truth out there for our kids to know and get it in the history books.
So that words might become action, we invite you to join with us in a struggle for a fairer and more just society for all Australians, irrespective of race.
Blame is 180 years ago, but acknowledgement is today.